The man who holds the world record for growing tomatoes pulled 1,368 pounds of fruit off of 4 plants. 4, not 4 rows, 4 plants. He did not buy a single thing from a garden center to do it, but he did pour something into the ground. It came from a feed store. It cost him pocket change. And about 30 years before he ever grew that crop, a scientist in Michigan had already worked out exactly why it works and published it in the journal Science. Almost nobody has heard of it. And it is sitting on a shelf right now, in a store you have driven past 100 times without looking twice. So here is what you are getting. 6 things to pour into that ground, in the exact order you will use them. 4 things everybody tells you to pour in, that you should pour out instead. And 1 test that costs about a nickel and can save your entire season. Do not put a tomato in the ground until you have heard all 6. Number 1. Before you dig a single planting hole, you are going to dig 1 shallow strip beside where the row will go. And what you lay down in that strip will do more for your tomatoes than anything else in this video. The usual advice for that strip is kitchen scraps. Bury your peelings and your coffee grounds beside the row and let them feed the plant all summer. It feels thrifty. And I understand exactly why people do it. Here is the part nobody mentions. Nebraska Extension has measured how long buried food waste takes to break down in garden soil. Their answer is 1 month to 1 year. So bury banana peels on planting day, and they are not feeding this tomato. They are a deposit into next year's tomato. Fine thing to do in October, not in May. 6 inches from a seedling that needs to be growing right now. So what goes in that strip instead? Go back to 1975. A researcher named Stanley Rise at Michigan State University reported something he could not explain. He took coarsely chopped alfalfa hay and laid it in a band alongside a row of crops, not tilled in, just a band beside the row. And the plants grew visibly, measurably better. Tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, cauliflower, field corn. And to his credit, he wrote it up honestly. He said the cause of this response is not clear. 2 years later, he found it. In 1977, Rise and his team published in the journal Science. They had isolated the active compound out of alfalfa meal and named it triacontanol, a natural plant growth regulator, a long-chain alcohol that lives in the waxy coating on an alfalfa leaf. And it works at doses so small they are hard to picture. The patent that followed documented a plant response at 0.4 of 1 gram per acre. Then jump forward to 2024. A study in Scientific Reports put triacontanol on tomato plants specifically. The plants bloomed earlier. They bloomed more. Photosynthesis went up. Water and nutrient uptake went up. Now, back to Alabama. Charles Wilbur of Crane Hill, Alabama, is the man from the top of this video. 1,368 pounds of tomatoes off of 4 plants. A cherry tomato vine that climbed 28 feet into the air, so tall he needed a ladder to pick it. Guinness put him in the book, and he stayed there. And in the written record of how Wilbur grew those plants, there it is. Alfalfa meal, laid down in a band along the row. He almost certainly never read that paper in Science. He just knew that it worked. So here is the recipe. Dig a shallow strip, 6 to 12 inches out from where your tomato row will sit. 1/2 cup of alfalfa meal per plant, spread down the length of it. Cover it over with soil. Then go plant your tomatoes in the main row, not in the hole, in a strip beside the hole. Alfalfa meal is high in nitrogen and it warms up as it breaks down, and you do not want that heat against brand new roots. A 50-pound bag at a feed store runs $15 to $20. No feed store near you? Walk into any pet shop in America and buy plain alfalfa rabbit pellets. Same plant. Water them in and they fall apart on their own. And now the honest part, because you deserve it. Reese's triacontanol results are famously hard to reproduce. Some labs got a large response. Some got nothing. Anyone who tells you a scoop of rabbit food will double your harvest is selling you something. But here is why the bet costs you nothing. Alfalfa meal is a genuinely good fertilizer on its own terms. Roughly 3 parts nitrogen, 1 part phosphorus, 2 parts potassium, plus a mountain of carbon that feeds every living thing in your soil. So on the worst day, you spent $15 on an excellent, cheap amendment you wanted anyway. And on the best day, you also got a growth regulator published in Science that a world record holder used for years without knowing why. That is not a gamble. That is a free lottery ticket stapled to something you already wanted. So tell me in the comments, have you ever bought rabbit food to feed your garden? Because I have a feeling some of you are about to. Number 2. Now the hole itself. Worm castings. Vermicompost. Everybody says add it. Almost nobody tells you how much. And the how much is the entire point. At the Soil Ecology Laboratory at Ohio State University, Clive Edwards and Norman Arrington spent years on this question. Not in a bucket on a back porch. In replicated field plots, with proper controls, published. And here is what they found. Marketable tomato yields in the vermicompost plots came in consistently higher than yields from plots that got recommended rates of inorganic fertilizer. Worm castings beat the bag. But here is the number nobody hands you. Across their greenhouse work, tomato response climbs as you add vermicompost. And then it stops. Peak yield response landed around 20% by volume. Push past that and you do not get more tomatoes. You get exactly the same tomatoes, for more money. More is not more. Say that back to yourself the next time you watch somebody empty half a bag into a planting hole and call it a method. And there is a second finding out of that same laboratory that hardly anyone quotes. At substitution rates of 20 to 40%, they recorded significant drops in insect pest populations and in the damage those pests did. So the tomatoes were not just bigger, they were bothered less. The recipe. 2 good handfuls. Roughly 2 cups, mixed through the backfill soil of 1 planting hole, not dumped in a layer at the bottom where roots have to go hunting for it, mixed through the soil that goes back around the root ball. That is your 20%. That is all of it. Fish meal in the hole is fine. 2 rules. Mix it into the soil. Do not set a root ball on top of a pile of it. And cover it and water it in, because Nebraska Extension warns that protein-rich material buried shallow is a dinner bell for raccoons, skunks, dogs, and every digging animal within half a mile. A transplant dug up on night 2 is not a reduced harvest. It is a 0. Strip the bottom leaves before the plant goes in. NC State and Minnesota Extension both back that one. Leaves that touch soil are the first to catch early blight and septoria every single time. And now the mistake that will cost you your July. You are going to hear people tell you to space tomatoes 10 to 12 inches apart. Please do not do that. The University of New Hampshire Extension puts staked or caged tomatoes at 18 to 24 inches between plants, rows at least 5 feet apart. Unstaked, indeterminate plants need 2 to 3 feet. 10 inches is not close spacing. It is half the spacing. And what you buy with that extra plant is a bed that never dries out, air that never moves, and leaves that stay wet long enough for spores to germinate on them. That is the middle of July. That is your lower leaves going yellow and spotted, and you standing over them in the heat, wondering what you did wrong. You did not do anything wrong. You just did what the video said. Charles Wilbur, 342 pounds a plant, spaced his tomatoes 5 feet apart. So tell me, what is your spacing? Really? Be honest. I have been greedy too. Number 3, the liquid feed. What you pour on every 2 weeks, all summer long. The version you will see everywhere is rice flour, a spoon of turmeric, a handful of compost, hot water, steeped a few hours, poured on every fortnight. And you are told the rice flour is a rich source of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and trace elements. It is not. And this is not a matter of opinion. Rice flour is almost entirely starch. The very milling that turns rice into flour strips away the bran and the germ, and that is where the minerals lived. A tablespoon of it is a rounding error to a plant that is about to move well over 100 gallons of water through itself in one summer. And it is worse than useless. Raw starch is a pile of carbon with almost no nitrogen attached. The soil microbes that come to feast on it have to borrow nitrogen from somewhere to process all that carbon. And the somewhere is your soil, right at the root zone. Exactly where a young transplant is trying to build itself a body. You are pouring a nitrogen drain onto a plant that is desperate for nitrogen. Pour fish emulsion instead. $10 for a bottle, and 1 bottle carries you through the season. Roughly 5 parts nitrogen, 1 part phosphorus, 1 part potassium. Dilute it exactly as the label says, and give each plant a drink every 2 weeks. But now, the part that will make some of you sit straight up in your chair. There is a moment in the season when the kindest thing you can do for your tomato plants is stop feeding them. Watch for the first flower cluster to set. The moment you can see a green fruit the size of a pea, when you see that, cut the nitrogen. Not taper it, cut it. And here is why, and this comes from the University of California's Integrated Pest Management Program. Too much nitrogen fertilizer diverts calcium toward leaf growth and away from the fruit. It makes blossom end rot worse. I want you to hear what that means about you. The extra feeding, the generosity, the half dose on a Sunday morning because the plant looked like it wanted something. That act of kindness is the thing that has been causing the black, leathery, sunken patch on the bottom of your tomatoes. The one you have been fighting with eggshells and Epsom salt for 15 years. Nobody told you. Now you know. So from first fruit set onward, you swap nitrogen out for potassium. And I am going to show you where to get all the potassium you need, for free, in about 4 minutes. So tell me, do you feed all season long, or do you cut the nitrogen at first flower? Before we go on, I made you something, and it does not cost anything. There is a free blueprint for this video. It has the exact amount of every single thing we are pouring into that ground. Cups, tablespoons, per plant, no guessing. It has the feeding calendar, with the cut the nitrogen date marked right on it. It has the spacing chart by variety type, and it has step-by-step instructions for that nickel test I promised you, which is coming up in a few minutes, and which I would like every one of you to run this year. Point your phone at the code on the screen, or the link is sitting right there in the description. Download it, print it, and stick it on the inside of your shed door, where you will actually see it in May. That is all. Back to the garden. Number 4. Wood ash. You have heard this one. Wood ash, bone meal, crushed eggshells in the planting hole, for calcium, to stop blossom end rot. They are right about the material and completely wrong about the reason. And once you fix the reason, wood ash goes from a quaint folk habit to one of the highest value free things in your yard. Here is what is actually in it. The University of New Hampshire Extension puts hardwood ash at roughly 5% potassium, 25% calcium, 2% phosphorus, plus boron, copper, and zinc. Potassium. Potassium is the nutrient a ripening tomato pulls on hardest. And when a plant runs short of it, the fruit tells you, in a language most gardeners never learn to read, yellow shoulders. That hard, pale collar around the stem end that never colors up. Blotchy, uneven ripening, and flavor that simply is not there. You grew a beautiful, heavy, deep red tomato, and it tasted like the ones from the store, and you blamed the variety and never planted it again. That was not the variety. Half the gardening world feeds nitrogen, because nitrogen makes leaves, and leaves are the part you can see. But the fruit is the part you actually wanted, and the fruit runs on potassium, and it is free. It is sitting in your fireplace right now, and most of you have been throwing it away. The recipe, a 1/4 cup per plant, worked into the top 2 or 3 inches of soil around the base, timed for the moment the first fruit sets. The same moment you cut the nitrogen in method 3. 1 motion. Nitrogen off. Potassium on. Never dump it in the hole against fresh roots. Your ceiling is 20 pounds, 1 5-gallon bucket, per 1,000 square feet per year. Hardwood ash only. Never from painted wood, pressure-treated lumber, or a pellet stove. And now the warning. And this one is serious, and I will not let you leave without it. Rosie Lerner, the retired horticulture specialist at Purdue Extension, gives a warning almost nobody passes along. Keep dumping wood ash on a garden, year after year, without ever testing your soil, and you will drive that soil alkaline. And when TF climbs above 7, phosphorus, iron, manganese, zinc, and here is the cruel part, potassium itself, bind chemically to the soil and become unavailable. The nutrients are still down there. Your plants simply cannot reach them. And her advice for a garden where that has already happened is not a recipe. It is this. You may need to move your garden, or build raised beds and fill them with fresh topsoil. So this is the one method in this video where a soil test is not optional. $15 to $25 from your state extension service. Do it once. It will tell you whether the free potassium in your fireplace is a gift or a slow and expensive mistake. And never on potatoes, which get scab from it. Never on blueberries or azaleas. Which brings us to the eggshells. Mississippi State University Extension has a page on this. The title is a question, and the answer is no. Eggshells do not prevent blossom end rot. Minnesota Extension says exactly the same thing. And once you understand why, you will never crush another shell into a planting hole as long as you garden. Blossom end rot is not a soil calcium shortage. It is a delivery failure. Calcium moves through a tomato plant one way only, carried along in the water, pulled up through the plumbing, out to the leaves and out to the fruit. It cannot be moved back afterward. It cannot be redirected. And the blossom end of a young fruit is served by the thinnest, poorest end of that plumbing. So when the soil swings, soaked on Tuesday, bone dry by Saturday, the plant wilts, the water column stutters, and for a few critical days, the calcium does not arrive at the bottom of a fruit that is dividing cells as fast as it can. Those cells collapse, black, leathery, sunken. Your soil can be swimming in calcium. You will still get the rot, and a coarsely crushed shell takes years to break down. It was never releasing calcium into this season, and even if it had, calcium was never the problem. The real fix is free. Even moisture. 1 to 1.5 inches of water per week during fruit set, and a blanket over that soil to hold it there, which is method 5, and it is next. So tell me honestly, how many years have you been crushing eggshells? And did it ever, once, actually stop the rot? Number 5. Now, the ground cover. You will notice that most of these videos reach for the turmeric powder again right about here. Third time. Sprinkle it in the trench. It kills the soil fungus. It protects the young roots. And I want to be fair to that, because it is not a lie. It is just not a method. Curcumin, the compound that makes turmeric yellow, genuinely does inhibit fusarium and rhizoctonia. There is published laboratory work showing around 75% inhibition. That is real, and I will not pretend otherwise. But look at what that experiment actually was. An extract. At laboratory concentration, on a petri dish, on agar, with nothing else alive in it. Your planting hole is a different universe. Curcumin barely dissolves in water. It breaks down fast in light and heat. Soil microbes eat it for breakfast. And so there is no field trial of turmeric powder on tomatoes anywhere, no extension service in the United States that recommends it, and no turmeric fungicide registered with the Environmental Protection Agency, because nobody has been able to show it works out here, where you and I live. True on a petri dish, meaningless in your garden. And you might ask why so many videos keep reaching for the spice rack. Look at it as economics, and it explains itself. A teaspoon of turmeric is an ingredient the person already owns. It costs nothing to film, and it is a brilliant gold against dark soil. A soil test envelope and a bale of straw are neither cheap to say nor pretty to shoot. That is not a conspiracy. That is simply what gets made when the thumbnail decides the content. So what actually stops the fungus? The fear is correct. The fungus is entirely real. The solution is a blanket. Early blight and septoria leaf spots spend the winter down in your soil, in last year's plant debris. They do not fly to your plant. They get splashed onto it. A raindrop hits bare dirt, and that dirt goes up onto the underside of your lowest leaves, and it carries the spores with it. Put 2 to 3 inches of organic mulch on that soil, and the raindrop hits the mulch instead. The spore never becomes airborne. It never reaches a leaf. This is not folklore. Iowa State, Minnesota, NC State, and Purdue all say the same thing. Grass clippings from your own lawn. Straw, shredded dry leaves. 2 to 3 inches, spread wider than you think, out past the drip line, pulled back 2 inches from the stem. If you use grass clippings, dry them a day or two first. Fresh green clippings mat into a slimy layer that sheds water instead of holding it. And here is the detail that separates you from every other person watching a mulch video this spring. Iowa State Extension does not tell you to mulch on planting day. They tell you early June, because organic mulch lowers your soil temperature by about 5 degrees. And cold soil is the one thing on this earth that will make a tomato plant sit there and do absolutely nothing. So you put your plant into warm ground. You let the sun cook that bed for another 2 or 3 weeks. And then you lay the blanket down once the soil has committed to summer. Mulch too early, and all you did was spend good money buying your tomatoes a colder spring. And now the thing I have been building toward. Every gardening video on earth will tell you the same 3 things. Grass clippings are free. Straw is cheap. Manure is practically a gift. And then they stop talking. So let me tell you what they leave out. There is a family of herbicides: aminopyralid, clopyralid, picloram. They are used on pastures, hayfields, golf courses, and lawns to kill broadleaf weeds. And according to NC State Extension and Oregon State Extension, these chemicals survive things they have no business surviving. They survive composting. They survive a cow's digestive tract. They pass straight through the animal and come out the other side, in the manure, still active. And they stay active in hay, straw, manure, and grass clippings for months. Field reports run as long as 3 to 4 years. Tomatoes are near the very top of the sensitive list. Aminopyralid damages sensitive plants at concentrations above 0.2 of 1 part per billion. In 2010, growers in Washington state lost most of their vegetable crops to this. Not through carelessness. From composted dairy manure they had bought in good faith. From a supplier who bought hay in good faith. From a farmer who sprayed his own pasture entirely legally. And the plants usually do not even die. That is the cruelty of it. They come up twisted. The leaves cup and curl and go narrow and fern-like. And then they sit there all summer, giving you almost nothing. And you spend 3 months blaming yourself. So here is the test. It costs about a nickel. Take 2 pots. In the first, mix the suspect material, the clippings, the straw, the compost, the manure, in with some soil. In the second, put clean potting mix and nothing else. That is your control. Plant 3 bean seeds or 3 pea seeds in each pot. Water them. Wait 2 to 3 weeks. If the beans in the clean pot come up straight and open and normal, and the beans in the suspect pot come up twisted, cupped, curled, fern-like, then throw that material out. Do not put it on your garden. Do not put it in your compost pile. Walk it away and be grateful. 2 pots. 6 bean seeds. 3 weeks. That test has saved entire gardens, and hardly anybody has ever heard of it. And there is one more thing, and it is free, and it takes 1 second. NC State Extension gives you a tell. Look inside the bale. If there is clover in that hay, or alfalfa, or any legume at all, that field was never sprayed with these herbicides. It could not have been. Those chemicals kill clover. If the clover is alive in there, the chemical was never there. It does not work in reverse. A bale with no clover is not automatically contaminated. But a bale with clover is a bale you can trust. Learn to look for it. So tell me, has anyone here ever lost plants to bought-in compost, manure, or straw? Tell that story down there. Somebody scrolling past right now needs to read it, number 6. And so we come to the last one, the biggest one, and the one that has been sitting quietly in the back of this video since the first sentence. But first, one burial. You are going to be told to put a tablespoon of rock phosphate in the planting hole. Phosphorus for the roots, phosphorus for the flowers. A steady supply, all season long. Colorado State University Extension ran a 2-year trial on a certified organic field to look at exactly this. They compared dairy manure, dairy compost, dairy vermicompost, and rock phosphate, side by side. The rock phosphate produced no increase in plant-available soil phosphorus, and no yield improvement over the control, after 2 full growing seasons. None. And the reason is chemistry, not opinion. Rock phosphate only dissolves in acidic soil, roughly below a AF of 5.5. Most American garden soil is nowhere near that acidic. Above neutral, that phosphorus binds up with the calcium already in your soil, and it is simply not there for the plant, no matter what you paid for the bag. In that same trial, the compost and the vermicompost beat it outright. But you already put the vermicompost in the hole. That was method 2. Leave the rock phosphate on the shelf. Now, credit where it is owed. Fill the hole with water before you set the plant in. Let it drain. Then plant. It is free. It takes 90 seconds, and it puts a reservoir of water below the root ball, so the roots travel downward to find it instead of sprawling sideways. Good advice. Keep it. And now, Charles Wilbur, Crane Hill, Alabama, 1,368 pounds of tomatoes off of 4 plants, 342 pounds per plant. A cherry tomato vine 28 feet and 7 inches tall. The Guinness Book of World Records. He did not bury the stem. The written record of his method says it plainly. He set the plant at its original depth, just barely covering the root ball. the very same depth it had been growing at in the pot. The man who holds the world record for tomato yield did the exact opposite of the one thing every single video this spring has told you is non-negotiable. So is deep planting wrong? No. And here is where I give you something better than a rule. I will give you the reason, so you can decide for yourself, in your own garden, for the rest of your life. Tomatoes really do grow roots along a buried stem. That is true, and it is why this whole idea took hold. But a tomato makes the roots it needs. It always has. Roots go where the water and the air and the food are, and in almost every garden on this earth, that is the top few inches of soil. The roots that form along a buried stem are a bonus. They are not the foundation. And nobody has ever run a controlled trial showing that burying the stem doubles your harvest, because it does not. What deep planting actually is a rescue technique, a very good one. It is just not the engine. So here is your decision rule. Write this down. If your seedling is stocky and well hardened off, and your soil is genuinely warm, plant it at its original depth. Barely cover the root ball. Spend your energy on the 5 things in this video that actually move the needle. If your seedling is leggy, with a bare run of stem below the first true leaves, lay it down. Dig a shallow trench, 4 to 6 inches deep. Lay the plant on its side. Bend the growing tip gently upward. Bury that bare stem, and stake it the same day, before those new roots exist to be torn. And if you garden in the north, in cold spring soil, always use the trench. Never the deep vertical hole. And here is the reason nobody gives you. A deep hole pushes that stems straight down into colder soil. A shallow trench keeps it up in the warm surface layer, where the sun has been working all day. Same plant, completely different result. That is the whole reason the trench exists, and it has almost nothing to do with roots. So what was Wilbur actually doing if he was not burying stems? Soil volume. Planting holes 24 inches wide. Spacing, 5 feet apart. Thick straw mulch. Tall wire cages. Water delivered slowly and evenly through pipe he drilled himself. And he trained 18 branches up that cage, one at a time, tying each off with soft string. And alfalfa meal, banded down the row. No turmeric, no rock phosphate, nothing from the spice rack at all. He was not looking for a trick. He was doing 6 or 7 ordinary things extraordinarily well for 5 straight years, until they added up to a world record. And this is where I will probably get some letters. So go on. Deep, trench, or original depth? Tell me your zone, and tell me what actually happened in your garden. I read every one of them. One more story, and then I will let you go. Logan, West Virginia. The 1930s. A man named Marshall Cletus Biles ran a radiator repair shop at the bottom of a steep mountain, and the coal trucks would boil over on the climb and roll back down the hill to him. Everybody called him Radiator Charlie. He started picking cotton at 4 years old, and he said, proudly, that he never went to school a single day in his life. And in the middle of the Great Depression, he decided he was going to build a better tomato. He put 1 German Johnson plant in the center and 10 other big-fruited varieties in a ring around it. Then he took a baby's ear syringe, the little rubber bulb, and went around that circle collecting pollen and squirted it onto the flowers in the middle. Then he saved the seed and did it again the next year. And the next. 7 years. When he finally had what he was after, he sold the seedlings for $1 apiece. Serious money in 1940. People drove 200 miles over that mountain to buy one. He paid off his $6,000 mortgage with tomato plants. He said so himself in a recording his grandson made, and you can still listen to his voice today. And that is why, more than 80 years later, you can walk into a garden center in any state in this country and buy a variety called Mortgage Lifter. He had no vermicompost, no turmeric, no rock phosphate, no YouTube. What he had was attention. The kind that notices what actually happened, instead of what he had been told would happen. He had the patience to run the same experiment for 7 years running, and he was willing to be the only man in Logan County doing it his own way. That is still the whole thing. Go pay attention to your own dirt.